Hello and welcome back to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life, as studies routinely show that those who read their Bibles regularly have significantly lower symptoms of depression, anxiety, and anger, whilst also significantly higher feelings of forgiveness, compassion, and a sense of purpose in their lives. So if you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. And today we're going to be going through Leviticus chapter 5. And again, in Leviticus chapter 5, we're going to get some more instructions for sin and trespass offerings that are committed, without intention, unintentionally, or like in ignorance, this sort of thing. Things like failing to testify when you're summoned, touching ritual uncleanness, but that's unknowingly, uttering a rash oath, but again, it all has to be unknowingly. And then when a person actually realizes, oh shoot, I've done something wrong, like their guilt, they've got to confess it, and they have to bring, as we saw throughout the rest of Leviticus, they have to bring an appropriate offering to the table, a female lamb or a goat, or what if they're poor, they can't bring a lamb or a goat. It would have to be 2 turtle doves, a pigeon, or even a quantity of fine flour. So this chapter is also going to treat a distinct category. How are we going to address when people are unfaithful regarding holy things, which requires restitution? And added 1/5 and a ram as a guilt offering, so the people can make atonement for what they've done. And the law shows God's holiness, human responsibility, mercy for the poor, and practical steps for restoration. So again, Leviticus chapter 5 is a part of the first 7 chapters of Leviticus, which is going to continue the sacrificial theology by focusing on what happens when you unintentionally breach the covenant. And it's going to balance the seriousness of the sin with the accessibility that God provides, as well as options for the poor and procedures for restitution. All of this. So, without further ado, let's read verse 1 of Leviticus chapter 5. So verses 1 to 6 are going to be unintentional sins, failure to testify, hidden uncleanness, and rash oaths. Verse 1. When any of you sin in that you have heard a public adjuration to testify, and although able to testify as one who has seen or learned of the matter, do not speak up, you are subject to punishment. Verse 2. When any of you touch any unclean thing, whether the carcass of an unclean beast, or the carcass of unclean livestock, or the carcass of an unclean swarming thing, and are unaware of it, you have become unclean and are guilty. Or when you touch human uncleanness, any uncleanness by which one can become unclean and are unaware of it, when you come to know it, you shall be guilty. Or any of you utter aloud a rash oath for a bad or a good purpose, whatever people utter in an oath and are unaware of it, when you come to know it, you shall in any of these be guilty. Verse 5. When you realize your guilt in any of these, you shall confess the sin that you have committed, and you shall bring to the Lord as your penalty for the sin that you have committed a female from the flock, a sheep or a goat as a purification offering, and the priest shall make atonement on your behalf for the sin. Verse 7 to 13, this is going to center around scaled offerings for the poor. That is, what are you meant to do if you don't have a sheep or a goat to offer? What am I meant to do in these situations? Verses 7 to 13 is going to address this. Verse 7. But if you cannot afford a sheep, you shall bring to the Lord as your penalty for the sin that you have committed 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a purification offering and the other for a burnt offering. Verse 8. You shall bring them to the priest, who shall offer first the one for the purification offering, wringing its head at the nape without serving it. Verse 9. He shall sprinkle some of the blood of the purification offering on the side of the altar, while the rest of the blood shall be drained out at the base of the altar. It is a purification offering. And the second he shall offer for a burnt offering, according to the regulation. Thus the priest shall make atonement on your behalf for the sin that you have committed, and you shall be forgiven. But if you cannot afford 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, you shall bring as your offering for the sin that you have committed 1/10 of an ephah of choice flour for a purification offering. You shall not put oil on it or lay frankincense on it, for it is a purification offering. You shall bring it to the priest, and the priest shall scoop up a handful of it as its memorial portion, and turn this into smoke on the altar, with the offerings by fire to the Lord. It is a purification offering. Thus the priest shall make atonement on your behalf for whichever of these sins you have committed, and you shall be forgiven. As with the grain offering, the rest shall be for the priest. Verses 14 to 19. This is going to be focused on guilt/trespass concerning holy things. Restitution, you're going to have a fifth, and then you're going to have a ram. So all of this is going to be important here. Offerings and restitution. Verse 14. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, When any of you commit a trespass and sin unintentionally against any of the holy things of the Lord, you shall bring as your guilt offering to the Lord a ram without blemish from the flock, convertible into silver by the sanctuary shekel. It is a guilt offering. And you shall make restitution for the holy thing in which you were remiss, and shall add 1/5 to it, and give it to the priest. The priest shall make atonement on your behalf with the ram of the guilt offering, and you shall be forgiven. Verse 17. If any of you sin without knowing it, doing any of the things that by the Lord's commandments ought not to be done, you have incurred guilt and are subject to punishment. You shall bring to the priest a ram without blemish from the flock, or the equivalent as a guilt offering, and the priest shall make atonement on your behalf for the error you committed unintentionally, and you shall be forgiven. It is a guilt offering. You have incurred guilt before the Lord. Okay, now it's time for some deep biblical unlocks. In verses 1 to 6, we saw that sins that are discovered later, right? When a person realizes, oh my goodness, I've sinned before, and they've given some sins, like they've listed some sins here in Leviticus chapter 5. So one of them is a silent witness, that is, you've seen something, but then you didn't testify that what you've seen. Contact with uncleanness, or a rash oath. You make a rash oath. The right response, how you meant to account for all of these sins that you have committed, is to confess and to bring a female from the flock, that is a lamb or a goat, as a sin offering, so that the priest may make atonement. And this ritual repeats the pattern which was found in chapter 4. You identify, you lay on hands, you see the substitution there. What is happening here is the sin is passed through your hands into the animal, and then you have priestly mediation, and then the removal of the defilement. What this means within how we can apply this in our everyday lives is that confession is not optional. Even during the times of Leviticus, confession was not optional. You have to recognize the sin, and confession actually triggers the remedial pathway that God provides. Then in verses 7 to 13, there are some provisions that are instituted for the poor. It actually starts in verse 11. But if you cannot afford 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, you shall bring as your offering for the sin that you have committed 1/10 of an ephah of choice flour for a purification offering. You shall not put oil on it or lay frankincense on it, for it is a purification offering. So, if the offerer cannot afford a lamb, the law allows 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one treated as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. If still unable, the person may bring a quantity of fine flour which is carefully regulated, no oil or frankincense, because this is a purification or sin offering. God's system here is merciful and economically aware, that is, it gives access to forgiveness to both the poor and the rich alike. God values the worshipper's heart and allows anyone to re-enter covenant life. This is an important theme, right? Even though God is holy and set apart, God is merciful, loving, and just. He wants people to come back to Him. And the way he does that is by having this entire sacrificial system, because he knows that people are not going to follow his commands, not going to live according to the covenant, and hence he makes this entire sacrificial system to allow them to re-enter the covenant that he has made. In verses 14 to 19, we see guilt about holy things, right? The restitution, the 1/5, and the ram as the guilt offering. Okay, so when someone has been unfaithful regarding holy things, that is, misappropriation, failure to give what was due to the sanctuary, the person must make full restitution, add 1/5 of the value, give it to the priest, and bring a ram without blemish as a guilt offering. Then the priest makes atonement and the offender is forgiven. This section, right, which is verses 14 to 19, combines sacrificial atonement and financial atonement, because a sin against holiness requires both the ritual, right, that we see, and the financial reparation. That is, guilt offerings emphasize that sin has a social and a financial cost, and then to repair the sin, that is to say, the justice in this case and the mercy, both work together. There is a financial and a social cost associated with sin. In this particular instance, it makes sense as well. Okay, what are the key things to understand from this chapter though? Number one, if you slip, it can turn into a prompt confession. When you slip, you should confess it immediately. To God, obviously, you can confess to God, but depending on the severity of the sin, what it led to, you may require some other people to hear as well. I have a trusted brother, which I tell most things to, right? Now, sometimes my shame and guilt may prevent me from telling everything that I wish to tell him, but I need to have someone who I trust, which I can confess to. You can also confess to a pastor, a priest. You can confess to the church. It's important to confess the sins that you do, depending on its severity, because by confessing, you're able to let go of the burden that the sin provides. Satan's greatest trick is by making you feel so shameful when you commit a sin. He makes you think and believe that God is too far from you because the thing that you've done, it's too shameful. God would never forgive what you've done. But that's complete bogus, as we all know, because Christ came into the world for all sinners, and there is always forgiveness in Jesus Christ. The truth is, Christ lets you battle with your sin. He actually lets you struggle and wrestle with the sins that you have committed because he wants to build in you other disciplines, other skills that allow you to become a better man or woman. And in this case here, right, if you fail to confess your sins, it festers, it builds deep within your psyche, and then it becomes much more difficult to repent as you keep it hidden for so long. You end up living two lives, one for your own good Christian self, and then one deep, darker life. So, lust grows by small, unnoticed failures, a one-time glance, a secret habit, a rationalized lapse. But Leviticus 5 tells us that unintentional and even hidden lapses are real. Notice, all of these sins are under the pretext that they are committed unintentionally. It doesn't matter if a sin is committed unintentionally. God's law has been broken, and the remedy is not even just stoic self-blame, it is confession, and there is an appropriate sacrifice, and crucially, restoration and practical change. So the chapter's mercy for the poor reminds us as well that even forgiveness is universal and no one is disqualified. God's grace. So let go of the sin by confession and restitution. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help you keep up your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. I upload daily, so if you don't want to miss tomorrow's episode, feel free to rate the show and follow. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And always remember, If you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.